Hi, this is Michelle from Simply Scaife Handmade with a tutorial on tips and techniques for hand quilting. Some of the things that I learned early on in my hand quilting years was that knots are a part of quilting. Anytime you do something with thread, you're going to encounter an issue with knotting. When I start quilting, I sit down and I take a length of thread that's 12 to 18 inches long. And one of the things that I do to prevent or to try to make knot tangling less of an issue is to use a wax disc. It comes in a plastic case. You can buy it anywhere that thread is sold. And you just take your thread and slide it through the grooves and run it along the little wax disc inside. And it provides a coating for your thread to help keep it from tangling, or if tangling occurs, to make it easier to untangle. Another thing I've done in the past was to use a simple dryer sheet. It prevents the static and the cling, and it kind of gives a nice softness if you're just running your thread over this. It's easy to carry, they're relatively inexpensive, and it's a really good technique. Next thing in order when we start hand quilting is to thread our needle. And my way of threading is to simply put the thread in my fingers, just pinch it. I take my needle and walk it down, just kind of slide it down and slide the eye over the thread, just like that. For a knot, I take the end that is not in the needle, wrap it around my finger, and just roll it off the edge, and have a small, simple, basic knot. When I want to start quilting, my personal preference when I get started is if I'm stitching vertically in this direction, then I want to enter and hide my knot perpendicular to that line. So since my stitches are going to run this direction on my quilt, I'm going to come in from the side of it and anchor my knot in between the layers of the quilt sandwich. I go about a nail length from where I want to start, just off to the side, poke my needle through the top layer, kind of make my way through the batting, but not the back of the quilt. This is hiding in between the layers. My needle will come out right where I'm going to start quilting. We pull it in, give a little tug, and our knot snaps down into the fabric and gently hides in between the layers of the quilt. We get our thimble ready. I like a thimble with nice deep grooves, dimples here in the thimble, and I like the deep grooves, the deep dimples, because it gives me better control over the needle when I'm quilting. When I quilt, I want to just start at the distance I want my stitch. I rock with my thimble. As you can see, that thimble is holding on to the needle, and it goes through the layers of the quilt sandwich all the way to the back, rocks up, make a little stitch. Now, sometimes in quilting patterns or in quilting videos or something, you will see something that says load the needle. And basically that means you're putting stitches on the needle before you pull it all the way through the fabric. So I have one stitch loaded. I dip down, make sure I go all the way through, rock back up and make my hill. Now I have two stitches loaded onto the needle. Because I'm quilting at an angle, I'm not doing a straight line. I'm working in a circle. I'm only going to put 2 or 3 stitches on my needle at one time, so I don't want to load a bunch of stitches. Loading a lot of stitches would give me clunky, misshapen circles here, and we want that arch to be nice and smooth. And the best way I have found to keep an arch nice and smooth is to only take a few stitches at a time. So again, we're holding that needle with our thimble, the dimples in our thimble, and we're pushing through the fabric, rocking up, load a stitch. Rock back straight up, pushing through the fabric, and we rock back up and take another stitch. We have 2 stitches loaded on our needle. This thumb pushes down in front, our underneath finger pushes the fabric up, and that gives us the little hill to push that needle all the way through and pull our stitches tight. Now we don't want to pull so tight that we pucker. Can you see the puckering here? If you've noticed that you've gotten tight in your tension, what you can do sometimes is kind of just rub the thread and the fabric a little bit, and it will ease some of that puckering and kind of relax things back into a good shape. So it's good to check that every so often. Make sure you're not real tense when you're quilting. Another question that I get asked often is, how do I handle the underside of my quilt where my finger is? Some quilters, when they push that needle through to the bottom of the fabric and they're catching all the threads, they end up poking that bottom finger, and that creates a sore spot on the finger. I don't have that problem, but it's because when I'm pushing my needle down, my finger is actually behind the needle. So what I'm saying is, when this needle goes through the fabric, instead of being point down on the tip of my finger like this, my finger is behind it. So when it slides through, it's sliding past my finger instead of into the tip of my finger. So when this needle goes down in through the layers of fabric, my finger is behind it. Can you see it bouncing there? And when I want the needle as my finger, as the top with the needle rocks back, the underneath finger pushes up high, and then my thumb comes forward and creates that little hill so that I can load a stitch and then pull it through. If you notice that you're hand quilting and that finger is getting tender, they sell little adhesive thimbles. They're a little sticker that sticks right on the tip of the pad of your finger, and that will help with that soreness. When I want to finish off where I'm working, I simply hold my thread to the side. I want to make sure that I finish my stitches and I cut my thread long before I get, 2 inches of thread left. I want to make sure I have about 4, because that way I can hold the thread to the side. I want to take my needle and loop it around my thread 3 times. I want to take that as close to the fabric as I can get and gently pull the thread through until I have a little knot very close to my fabric. I insert my needle exactly where I stopped stitching. Again, I'm going to go perpendicular. I was stitching this direction. I'm going to finish it this direction, hiding my needle between the layers of the quilt sandwich, not all the way through to the back. And I give it a nice tug and a little pop, and the knot hides within the layers of the fabric, and I can snip my thread and be finished. I do want to mention that there are imperfections in all quilting. As you look at my quilt right here, it's not probably obvious to you where my stitches may vary a little bit, or where my lines wobbled some. Always bear in mind that no one is going to take your quilt with a magnifying glass and look at every single stitch to see if you have them exactly spaced. They're going to enjoy it from a distance, and they're going to treasure the work you've done. So I only rip out my stitches if there is a very big problem, or if the thread has broken somewhere and I need to go in and repair. Otherwise, keep going, let it be, and then go back later and just kind of set it away from yourself some, so that you can look at it and say, look at how I've done. I hope these tips and techniques have helped you. If you have a specific question for me about hand quilting techniques or tips, or if you have a problem with something you're working on, please feel free to send me an email at simplyscafe@yahoo.com, or leave me a message in the comment box. I'd love to work on it with you. Have a great day, and go stitch something beautiful.